thousands of Russian families are desperately searching for their missing loved ones in Ukraine, as requests for information from Ukrainian authorities continue to mount. While the number of Russian soldiers killed remains disputed, their families are turning to social media and international organizations for answers. The situation not only reflects a humanitarian tragedy, but also raises questions about accountability and transparency in the military, and points to the failings of President Putin's leadership, who has failed to provide clarity and accountability to soldiers and their families. Scale of crisis. Recent data reveal an unprecedented scale of missing Russian servicemen in Ukraine. Under Ukraine's I Want to Find initiative, more than 50,000 Russian families have submitted requests for information about missing soldiers. In addition, Russian Deputy Defense Minister Anna Tsivilyova said that the Russian Defense Ministry has received 48,000 requests for DNA testing from relatives seeking information about missing servicemen. However, the true scale of the crisis appears to be much more serious. Ukrainian authorities estimate that the total number of missing Russian servicemen exceeds 100,000, not counting confirmed casualties. In addition, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported that since February 24, 2022, Russia has lost 796,490 soldiers, including 1,730 deaths in just one day. The distribution of casualties shows a wide impact, with volunteers from Central Asia among the dead, including 47 from Uzbekistan, 51 from Tajikistan, and 26 from Kyrgyzstan. Reports also indicate that the recruitment effort has extended to Cuba, Iraq, Yemen, and Serbia. Over time, the number of requests for information about missing servicemen has steadily increased. By November 2023, there had been 48,000 requests for DNA testing, and by January 2024, the number had surpassed 50,000. Current estimates suggest that more than 100,000 Russian servicemen are missing. Of those confirmed dead, volunteers make up a significant proportion, with 13,781 dead, about 20% of the total. The majority of volunteers who died at the front were between the ages of 42 and 50, with 4,100 falling into this age group. Furthermore, 250 volunteers over the age of 60 died in the conflict, the oldest being 71. The Russian government maintains strict control over information about casualties, as demonstrated at a recent meeting of the Duma, where officials were warned not to make specific figures public. This policy of information control has led many families to seek answers through Ukrainian channels, in particular through the I Want to Find project, which was originally part of the I Want to Live hotline before becoming an independent initiative due to the volume of requests. Families' desperate search. Beneath the shocking figures lie stories of personal tragedies, as Russian families face increasingly complex journeys to find missing servicemen. The search for information often begins with desperate calls to the Defense Ministry hotline, but families are repeatedly given conflicting information about the condition of their loved ones. Maria Shumova's story is a typical example of the pain many families endure. Her son, Vladimir, 23, went missing after his reconnaissance unit was ambushed near Kiev. The last contact with him was a brief phone call on March 15th. Similarly, Elena Veselov's month-long search letter to find her brother in a vegetative state at Moscow's Burdenko Hospital after he was seriously wounded in battle. Families face a myriad of difficulties in finding information. The Defense Ministry hotline frequently provides inconsistent information, ranging from in combat to dead to missing. Military commanders also often withhold specific information about casualties, citing security concerns. Furthermore, the requirement for official paperwork has created additional barriers for families seeking answers. The continued uncertainty has placed a heavy emotional and financial burden on Russian families. Instead of finding solace, the system's shortcomings have turned families into amateur sleuths, spending hours scanning social media platforms, joining online chat groups, and visiting hospitals and morgues. The consequences extend beyond the emotional to the financial. Still, many families continue to search through other channels, including Ukraine's I Want to Find initiative, which has received more than 50,000 requests from Russian families. The situation is exacerbated by the Russian government's lack of transparency. Although Deputy Defense Minister Anna Tsivilyova has admitted to receiving 48,000 requests from relatives for DNA tests, officials have since been warned not to make the sensitive information public. But for families like the Shumovas, the search is never-ending. For me, it's all the time, waiting, searching, constantly going over and over in my head, not knowing where to write, how to find my son. I don't know anymore, Maria Shumova said. Ukraine's response system. In response to the dramatic increase in inquiries about missing Russian servicemen, Ukraine has responded by establishing a comprehensive identification and notification system. The I Want to Find project, which originated from the I Want to Live hotline, has evolved into a separate initiative to address these cases, providing much-needed support to confused and desperate families like Shumova's. The project now operates independently under the coordination of the Ukrainian Headquarters for Prisoner of War Management. Initially, the initiative was a separate telephone line, but it quickly expanded into a large-scale operation after receiving a huge number of requests. The project maintains a common registration system for missing persons, which has been in operation since May 2023. The system has achieved significant results in handling cases. 588 missing Russian servicemen have been found, of whom 533 are alive and confirmed as prisoners of war, 55 have died, and 33 bodies have been transferred to Russia. The project handles requests through multiple channels, including a dedicated hotline and a newly launched chatbot service. To date, the system has received more than 50,000 requests from Russian families seeking information about missing relatives. The initiative operates within the framework of international humanitarian law and cooperates with a number of international organizations. Specifically, the International Commission on Missing Persons, ICMP, provides training and resources. The European Union supports identification efforts, and the Red Cross facilitates access to detention facilities. In addition, Ukraine has implemented a detention register subsystem in 109 local police units to ensure the proper recording and processing of detainees. The system maintains transparency while protecting the rights of both missing persons and their families. The project has also established partnerships with forensic institutions. In September 2023, a memorandum of cooperation was signed between ICMP, Lviv Forensic Medical Department, and Danilo Halitsky National Medical University to improve medical education and forensic expertise. Identification challenges. However, these collaborative efforts face significant challenges, especially given the complex battlefield conditions and technical limitations that are making it difficult to identify Russian servicemen missing in Ukraine. The International Commission on Missing Persons, ICMP, is currently facing unprecedented obstacles in collecting DNA samples and evidence as the conflict continues. Battlefield conditions have a major impact on identification efforts. Bodies are often exposed to factors such as chemical or fire exposure, immersion in salt or fresh water, and exposure to changing weather conditions over long periods. Furthermore, areas with multiple bodies at the same time make identification more difficult. However, forensic teams must maintain accurate records despite these adverse conditions. Ukraine's current DNA testing capabilities are limited, with only 13 fully equipped laboratories meeting ISO 17025 standards. The current testing system is facing a significant resource burden. 240 DNA experts are working, but each one has to process 35 to 40 tests per month, while the total number of pending cases is up to 12,000. The workload alone is up to 300 cases per day, putting enormous pressure on the laboratories. In addition to laboratory limitations, the success of DNA testing depends largely on the quality of the body and the environmental conditions at the collection sites. The identification process requires a rigorous documentation process. Each biological sample needs to be assigned a unique file number and photographed in detail. Sample storage also requires temperature-controlled cold storage, detailed tracking of all staff access, and full storage of information about storage locations. Specimens must be carefully packaged in tamper-proof evidence bags. The scale of missing cases has exceeded the capacity of current systems. Russian authorities report that 48,000 relatives have submitted DNA samples to the Interior Ministry's database. Meanwhile, the International Commission on Missing Persons has set up a dedicated facility in The Hague, where technicians will extract DNA from small bone samples to match with family DNA samples. The identification process is further complicated by battlefield conditions, where combat forces are rapidly depleted and divided into different sectors. The loss of combat capability often accelerates commanders' decision-making about casualty management, creating additional challenges for gathering and processing accurate information. Russian official position. The Kremlin has maintained tight control over information about Russian military casualties in Ukraine, as officials face mounting evidence of serious losses. In 2015, President Vladimir Putin signed a decree declaring all military deaths a state secret, marking the beginning of a comprehensive information control strategy. The Russian Defense Ministry has consistently reported very low casualty figures, putting the official figure at 1,351 servicemen killed. However, that figure is in stark contrast to independent estimates. The Wall Street Journal, citing Western intelligence officials, has said the number of Russian servicemen killed could be as high as 200,000. Meanwhile, Russia's Deputy Defense Minister Anna Sivilyova has admitted that the ministry has received 48,000 requests for DNA tests from relatives seeking information about missing soldiers. Andrei Kartapolov, head of the Russian Parliament's Defense Committee, has since warned against making the figures public, calling them classified information. The military's record-keeping system is notoriously inaccurate. Commanders continue to receive salaries for missing soldiers, while the bodies of some 7,000 Russian servicemen remain unclaimed in Ukrainian morgues. Russian sources typically report only 0.3 deaths for every serviceman killed. The Kremlin has implemented comprehensive measures to control information about military casualties, including criminalizing statements that distort the military, classifying casualty lists as state secrets, and restricting local media coverage in areas with large casualty counts. These measures have affected how information reaches the public. The Svetlogorsk City Court has ruled that publishing lists of Russian servicemen killed is classified information and could result in criminal prosecution. Notably, state television has avoided mentioning the casualty figures. The government's stance appears to be motivated by concerns about the public reaction. However, whether this strategy is sustainable remains unclear, although analysts say the rising death toll may not generate enough popular discontent to threaten Putin's position. Overall, Russian sources have both underestimated their casualties and overestimated those of the Ukrainian military, with a ratio of 4.3 Ukrainian servicemen killed for everyone who died. Government decisions influence compensation policies. The aggressor state refuses to recognize the missing as dead, thereby avoiding financial obligations to the families. This creates a complex web of administrative and legal challenges for families seeking closure or compensation. Compensation politics. The Russian military compensation policy reveals a complex payment system, with a clear distinction between confirmed casualties and those who are missing. Families of dead soldiers are entitled to a total of up to 14 million rubles, about $158,000, in compensation. The compensation structure includes several tiers of payments. Families of the dead receive a basic insurance payout of 8.8 million rubles, plus a 5 million ruble compensation payment and payments from local government agencies ranging from 1 to 3 million rubles. Wounded soldiers will receive 3 million rubles under a 2022 decree. However, reports suggest that Moscow often classifies dead soldiers as missing to avoid financial obligations. The financial burden on Russian households has reached unprecedented levels. The Kremlin will need about 2.3 trillion rubles, $26 billion, to make one-off payments to wounded soldiers and the families of those killed. That would account for about 6% of Russia's 2024 budget. The compensation system faces major administrative challenges. Families of contract soldiers and those who died often do not receive their payments, while some wounded veterans receive little support, with one case where a severely wounded soldier received only 2 boxes of carrots and a bag of onions instead of compensation. Legal hurdles include stringent documentation requirements, complicated verification processes, multiple layers of bureaucracy, and uneven application of the policy. One woman whose husband was a veteran had to bring her husband to file a claim despite the loss of a limb. In another case, severely injured soldiers have struggled to get compensation. These challenges add to the psychological burden on families. The effectiveness of the compensation system is further undermined by administrative delays. Some soldiers wounded near Kharkiv have waited months without a response to their compensation claims, even though by law valid claims must be responded to within 15 days. Humanitarian aspects. In parallel, international humanitarian organizations are leading efforts to resolve the crisis of missing Russian soldiers in Ukraine. The International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, is at the forefront of efforts to clarify the fate of 28,000 people sought by families on both sides of the conflict. These organizations operate under the framework of international humanitarian law, which imposes basic obligations on all parties to armed conflict. These obligations include halting disappearances through accurate documentation, ensuring the humane treatment of prisoners of war, handling and identifying remains properly, and protecting the rights of families to know the fate of their loved ones. As part of these efforts, the Geneva Conventions require all belligerents to establish national information bureaus. These bureaus are designed to collect and transmit information about detained defense personnel, primarily functioning as official channels for managing information about prisoners of war and those held in detention camps. The work of these humanitarian organizations is critical in addressing both the legal and emotional needs of families, especially amidst the ongoing challenges of compensation claims and the search for missing soldiers. International humanitarian law imposes basic obligations on all parties to armed conflict. These include stopping disappearances through accurate documentation, humane treatment of prisoners of war, proper handling and identification of remains, and protecting the rights of families to know the fate of their loved ones. The Geneva Conventions require belligerents to establish national information bureaus to collect and transmit information on detained defense personnel. These bureaus primarily serve as official channels for managing information on prisoners of war and those held in detention camps. The International Red Cross, ICRC, runs the Central Search Service, which has organized the largest search operation for missing persons since World War II. Its efforts have yielded significant results, with over 165,000 contacts received, 9,000 families notified, 3,000 POBU visits conducted, and 50 countries participating. The ICRC acts as a neutral intermediary between Russia and Ukraine, collecting and protecting information on missing persons, with a mandate from the 1949 Geneva Conventions, ensuring its role as an impartial humanitarian actor. Non-governmental organizations, NGOs, provide vital support to the families of missing Russian soldiers. A notable example is the Families of Poltava POWs and Missing Persons, which connects civilians with similar experiences. These organizations provide emotional support, guidance on administrative procedures, protection of families' rights, and documentation support. The International Commission on Missing Persons, ICMP, has set up specialized facilities in The Hague, where technicians take DNA samples from minimal bone fragments. Ultimately, their work supports the development of Ukraine's technical capacity to conduct investigations that meet international standards. By the end of 2023, the Ukrainian Ministry of Internal Affairs reported that 28,000 people had been registered in the Unified Register of Missing Persons. The ICRC works with Red Cross and Red Crescent societies in some 50 countries to provide answers to families. This extensive network allows the organization to handle more than 115,000 requests, including phone calls, online requests, letters, and in-person visits by desperate family members. The humanitarian response to the crisis of missing soldiers and civilians is facing significant hurdles as mass graves continue to be uncovered in areas once controlled by Russian forces. While both Russia and Ukraine have adhered to international law by establishing national information bureaus, which are tasked with documenting and transmitting information regarding missing persons, access to vital data remains inconsistent. Ambassador Yevgenia Filipenko of Ukraine has raised concerns about the substantial number of civilians detained by Russian authorities and called for greater international pressure on Russia to uphold its obligations under the Geneva Conventions. The International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, has emphasized that both sides in the conflict must take immediate steps to halt disappearances and ensure that families are informed about the fate of their missing loved ones. Future implications. As the humanitarian situation unfolds, the long-term consequences of Russia's military losses are becoming increasingly clear. The nation faces a demographic crisis that threatens to reshape its future, with implications that may last for generations. Russia is experiencing its worst labor shortage since 1998, exacerbated by the war and the immigration of over 1.3 million people in 2022, many of whom were younger, educated individuals from key industries. The country's fertility rates are projected to drop further, potentially reaching just 1.2 children per woman by mid-2024. This population decline, coupled with the ongoing social and economic challenges, may pose significant obstacles to Russia's recovery and stability in the years to come. The social fallout from these developments is already apparent in multiple forms. There has been a rise in single-parent households, a surge in domestic violence cases, and an increase in substance abuse, particularly among veterans. Mental health challenges, including PTSD, are becoming widespread, and workforce shortages are increasingly evident in ethnic regions. The shortage of personnel is putting tremendous pressure on the country's social fabric, with some regions experiencing a severe depletion of workers. The military is also facing significant recruitment challenges. The enlistment rate has dropped to just around 600 contract soldiers per day, while casualties have reached record levels, peaking at 1,523 troops lost per day in November. To address this, the government has offered substantial financial incentives, including signing bonuses as high as 5.2 million rubles in Moscow, but these inducements have proven insufficient. Regional recruitment targets are being met at only 50 to 60% of expectations. Additionally, military equipment shortages are exacerbating the crisis, with the military relying on an outdated Soviet-era weapons due to sanctions that limit access to modern technologies. To adapt to these challenges, the Russian government has made several policy adjustments, including amendments to the civil code regarding the declaration of missing or deceased status, improved tracking systems for potential recruits, and modifications to compensation structures for casualties. However, desertion rates have surged, with over 7,300 cases reported in Russian courts since September 2022, and more than 500 desertion inquiries in early 2024 alone. Regional impacts are particularly severe in ethnic areas like Buryatia, the Republic of Sakha, and Tuva, where entire villages are struggling to function due to labor shortages. The technological regression of Russia's economy, combined with rising labor intensity, has only intensified these difficulties. The exodus of educated professionals abroad is further compounding the situation, potentially leading to a long-term brain drain. The prolonged absence of this educated workforce, coupled with the isolation from international academic cooperation, threatens to undermine Russia's future development. Focus groups suggest a growing war fatigue among the Russian population, driven by the mounting casualties and the economic burden of the conflict. However, state censorship and control over information have limited public discourse on the issue, and the government has doubled down on patriotic rhetoric to justify the mounting losses, framing the conflict as a battle against the West. The ongoing loss of experienced troops and the shrinking workforce are poised to significantly undermine Russia's military and economic capabilities. With projections suggesting that the working-age population could decrease by a quarter by 2030, the country faces a demographic crisis that will likely affect its long-term stability and global influence. As these challenges unfold, it is crucial to consider how Russia will adapt to this changing landscape. What do you think are the potential outcomes for Russia as it grapples with these demographic and military challenges?